All right, Alexis, we've been talking about it. The time has finally come to do a very special lesson. And what do we call this lesson?
The dark arts of winning Monopoly.
Yes, the dark arts of winning Monopoly. So, yes, there's some secrets that I have passed down to you, and then you, traitorous spawn, use them against me in a game of Monopoly. But
Why teach him if you didn't want me to use it?
I didn't want you to use it against me. So we're going to go through sort of the 3 levels. So we'll start out, we'll do math and probabilities. I'm going to misspell probabilities. Probabilities. Then we're going to talk about the rules of the game, right? Different rules. And then trades and tricks. And some of this you already know, some of this I don't know if I've explained to you, but for all of those listening, yes, if you want to see your relatives and your close friends, flip over the Monopoly table and discuss. This is how you accomplish it. So, you ready to get started?
Let's go.
All right, so let's start with Monopoly playing board. How many spaces are there on a Monopoly playing board?
I'm unsure.
You're unsure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I never took the time to count them.
So there's 40.
There's 40?
Yes, there's 40 spaces on the Monopoly playing board. And that means that every single space has what probability of you rolling it?
One out of 40.
1 out of 40. All right. So, 1 out of 40. Now, this we're talking about is using math and probabilities to determine which are the best spaces to own in the game, because that's the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
Is the more property you own, the better, because for 2 reasons. So property accomplishes 2 things, right? It is your income, because when other players land on it, they have to pay you rent.
Yep.
And it is a safe space, because whenever you land on it,
you don't have to pay.
You don't have to pay. So ideally, you want to own the most properties as possible, and you want to own the properties where you are most likely to be playing the game. And you already know the answer to this question because I've told it to you. So we'll spoiler it for the people before I go through and explain the math of why this is true. What is the most common space for a piece to end up on in the game of Monopoly?
Like after the go.
No.
What?
Have you forgotten everything I've taught you already?
No. Sorry.
Jail.
Well, yeah. Oh, it's that one. Yeah.
All right, so every space on here, there's over the course of a long enough series of rolls, there's a 1 in 40 chance in landing on one of these spaces. But there's one space that has double the chance of the turn ending on it, right? So there's different rules in the game. So where you land isn't necessarily where your turn ends, right?
Yeah.
And so this space over here, just in the regular course of play, you can land on the square, but because we have this go to jail square here, you may land on it as part of your roll, but you're going to end up across the board in the jail tile because of that. And so jail automatically doesn't have a 1 in 40 chance, it has a 2 in 40 chance, or 1 in 10. So it immediately has double the chances of you being in this square compared to all the other squares. And that's just based on the board layout. There's other rules that make you end up in jail. So what's one of them?
The rules that make you end up in jail?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Rolling the doubles 3 times.
So if you roll doubles 3 times in a row, you end up going to jail. It's called the speeding rule, right? So what are the odds of rolling doubles just once?
Not likely.
Well, so you got two 6-sided dice.
Yeah.
So if you're rolling one dice, to get any number, you have a 1 in 6 chance.
So is it 1 in 12?
No, you don't add them, you multiply them.
1 in 36.
Yes. So there's a 1 in 36 chance that you're going to end up with a double roll just one time. To get doubles 3 times in a row, it's 1 in 36 times 36 times 36. So it's not very likely, but the speeding rule contributes you to going to jail. What's the other way that you end up in jail?
Don't you got a card or something?
Yes, the community chest and the chance cards both have cards that say go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to jail. So there's multiple instances of the chance and the community chest, and so there's a higher probability of landing on them than any of the other ones, or sort of than an other square. Your chance of getting a go to jail card is a little bit more difficult to figure because there's about 15 cards in the deck, in the standard deck, and your probability of getting the jail card depends, like it's not completely random. So like a dice roll, every time you roll the dice, you get a 1 in 6 chance of getting one of the numbers.
Yeah.
Well, whenever you're drawing through these cards, your odds change depending on how the deck is played out. So if we shuffle it, we pretend it's completely random. You've got a chance card. I roll, I land on chance. I take the top card off, and it's not a go to jail card, right? I put it on the bottom. You roll, you land on a chance. You now don't have a 1 in 15 chance. You have a 1 in 14 chance.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit harder to figure out the exact probabilities, but the end result is that jail, you are much more likely to, this is the jail, or the square that players are most likely to end up in during the course of the game.
So you buy everything near jail?
Not just near jail, but in a specific order from jail. So you roll 2 6-sided dice for your dice roll. What is the most common numerical result of the roll of 2 6-sided dice?
Oh, 7.
7. 7 is the most common roll because you can make 7 in lots of different ways. 1 in 6, 3 and 4, 5 and 2, right? And in these instances, the order doesn't matter. So if you have 1 as the first dice and 6 is the second dice, and then 6 is the first dice and 1 is the second dice, right? It all adds up to 7. So 7 is the most common dice roll whenever you have a 2 6-sided dice. So we want to find the place that is 7 spots from jail.
They kept that in mind.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
They kept that in mind since it's a community chest.
It's a community chest. So this is where our 7 roll will be. We obviously can't buy that. But what it means is that these squares, or the properties along this corner, are the most valuable properties because they're the ones that are most likely to be landed on during the course of the game. And this is the strategy that you and I butt heads with all the time, is buying up these oranges and reds.
Yeah.
So now you mentioned go. Go provides a bit of a secondary effect. So go is one of the more likely squares because there are community chests and chance cards that will take you to go.
Go is the second most likely.
I don't know if it's the second specifically. Actually, I think these trains might be a little bit higher because they are in the space after jail.
Well, yeah.
And there's cards that will take you on some of the railroads, depending on the version of the game that you have. But we're going to talk about railroads in just a second. So these spaces after go, there is some value in them. The only problem with these spaces is that the rent on them is very low. So you can own them, and even if people are landing on them because they're going to go more regularly, you're not going to get a lot of profit off of it because the rent is low. And people being sent to go is putting them in the pipeline to eventually end up in these group of properties anyway. But what these two things do together is they mean that the properties that are the most famous over here, we'll even change the color since we're going to talk about them being bad. These properties over here that are the most famous, the ones that some people are fascinated with, they're actually the least likely to be played on in a game.
Why are people fascinated with those?
Because they have the highest rents and they have some of the coolest names, I guess.
Oh, I see.
So there are cards that will take you to the boardwalk, and that gives them a little bit of utility. But the fact that there are cards that will take you to go, and then you have the space and have all these other rules that take you to jail, mean that this quadrant of the board over here is the one where you're least likely to play. So people don't land on that very much at all, and it makes those much less valuable. So if you're building a strategy, you want to build, or you want to try and occupy these properties here along this elbow here, the first. After that, trains become very important.
Yep.
Now, so the beauty of trains comes from a couple of different things, or railways, right? So one is that you've got railroads bracketing these two, or your very high quality zone here along this angle coming out of jail. So that makes them very good. You also have one over here that is can be occupied by somebody coming out of go, which makes it probably the third best railroad out of the two. B&O, I would say, is probably the best, followed by Pennsylvania, although it really depends. Depending on the roles people get out of jail, they're both very, very good.
Well, this one, you can really do some damage with Pennsylvania.
So Reading Railroad's probably third, and Short Line is probably the fourth most effective one. So they're in this, two of the railroads are in this really good zone. The third one is on probably this other good zone where people are coming off of go. Because there's one on each side of the board, that gives an advantage. If you own all four railroads, people are always in danger of landing on one of your railroads, and that is a benefit to you. They also benefit from cards, because there are some cards that you can get in Chance and Community Chest that will move a piece onto these railroads, and so that's a possibility that someone's going to land on one of these squares and then end up on one of your railroads. The final benefit from them is that their rent grows from the number that you own. So if you own all four railroads, it can make you put you in a strong position, because the rent on them is going to be high, every single one that you land on. You don't have to build houses on them or anything like that to sort of strengthen them up. And you never are going to be hit with the upkeep cost card.
Yeah.
So railroads are pretty strong. So using math to sort of determine the placement of where people play on the board, there are a couple of strategies. One is, again, to try and get things on this angle. You can try and get railroads. Of course, if you can get a couple of railroads and some of these properties, you can be in really good shape. These properties here up close are a little bit too close to jail to be of great benefit. Now, if you have them in your hand, it certainly helps, but those would be much more of a secondary or tertiary concern behind these and a railroad. The only reason that, honestly, if I had the electric company, I would certainly trade it away for one of these other properties. If you have the waterworks, the electric company becomes a little bit more valuable because you're multiplying the dice roll by 10 if someone lands on the waterworks. And the waterworks is, since it's before the go to jail, it is of reduced value, but it is of some value. Honestly, I would trade away the utilities to get other properties if they were in this range, because even the maximum is $120, right? Because if you roll a 12, you multiply it by 10, it's going to be $120 compared to railroads when you can hit somebody with $100 or $200 every time they land on them. So these are the ones that you want to go for the most. Railroads, and then around that elbow, based on the probabilities. After that, you can build a strategy, and I think you've done this before.
Oh, I have.
In a game where we played. If you can't get these prime properties, building one up on Go, it is possible. You're going to need some other help.
Well, yeah, but I've done some damage stacking on Go.
Yeah, because there is a high probability of people hitting on these properties. They're just not going to bring in enough revenue. And you really don't want to go out of your way to get any on this side of the board, just because that's the least likely where someone's going to play. If you end up with them, you either trade them for properties along this more useful angle, or as people get eliminated from the game, you can hold on to them just for so that you have more safe space, or you can mortgage them, things like that, to get quick cash. They can become valuable, but it's really more for what you can do to manipulate them, and less for people are going to land on these and pay big bills.
I think those ones are better for the someone else has this one color, but they have a color I need in the useful avenue, so I'll trade for this thing.
Yes.
That is one of the best.
All right. So, all that makes sense?
Yeah.
All right, good. So let's go back, and we're going to talk about some of the rules of the games. One of the most important rules of the games, and this is in the rules, has to do with houses. And this is something that you want to be especially attentive to, because in the official rules, what happens if the bank runs out of money?
You can sell your houses?
No, the bank. If the bank doesn't have money, you can just tear up paper and you can make more money.
Yeah.
Right? You could write on to make money. In the official rules of the game, the housing supply is capped by the number of plastic pieces in the game board.
Yeah.
And so there is a strategy where you can exhaust the supplies of houses, and you can limit people's ability to develop. So there's two rules that are of interest. So the first one is that so you only have the plastic houses, and you must develop evenly. So that means that if you have a monopoly, you've got 3 properties, and you have one house on each of them, you have to go through and build 2 houses on each of them before you can put a 3rd house on one of them, right? So you can't have, let's go back and let's look at the board. So if I have, let's say that I've completed my strategy, I own these red properties. Okay, so I put a house on each one. I can't say I want to put 3 on Illinois while these each have 1. I have to have 2 on each of them before I can build a 3rd one on there.
Yep.
Okay, so that's called the equal development. Now, what that allows you to do is if you can get a monopoly early, or if you can get a couple of them early, you want to build out. I say you want to. It's a strategy that you can use. There are some downsides to it, but you can say build out where you have houses on each of these properties evenly developed, but you never upgrade them to the hotel. And if you can get out ahead of people, you can exhaust the supply of houses.
And they can't upgrade.
So yes, all of your opponents are trapped. They can't upgrade, and you have your properties upgraded almost to their complete capacity, but
just under to keep the supply down.
Right. So let's look at an example. So let's look at look at a Monopoly card. Monopoly card. We'll just look at Boardwalk. Famous. All right.
Here we go.
So Boardwalk. If we look at Boardwalk, is it going to show me? So houses cost $200 each. A hotel, $200 plus 4 houses. So for an additional $200, it only goes up, or it goes up $300. So from 1 house to 2 houses, $400. From 2 houses to 3 houses is more than double. It's like $800.
Yeah.
And then we go up $300 and $300. So your return on an investment is really from going from 2 houses to 3 houses. And so you could develop a property and just say, okay, we're going to have 3 houses on each one of them. Or if you decide to put down the 4th house, because that allows you to exhaust the supply, your return on investment from going from 4 houses to a hotel is actually pretty low. And if it allows you to sort of trap someone or trap any of the other players and prevent them from building up their houses, you can really ramp up your income as opposed to they're sort of stuck, underdeveloped.
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it. You can't, if you hit the upkeep card, it's a risk. I would say that the risk is worth it. Just because of the income that you get. The other sort of risk is if you end up with somebody who gets Monopoly faster than you do. So there's a chance that you may not be able to play it out, and between the two of you, you might have a bunch of houses and you may temporarily tap out the supply. But if you have another player that also had a bunch of monopolies they were able to develop earlier, they may decide to go to hotels, which is going to free up houses for other players. So it's not something that you can rely on, but it is something that if you can get a monopoly early, especially if you can get a couple of them early, you can limit the housing supply and you can force your opponents to be underdeveloped.
So it works until someone gets good.
Yeah. Well, there is some luck, and this is one of the things that we'll talk about in the rules too. And it sort of depends on just how you're able to get properties early in the game. So let's talk about that. What happens if someone lands on a square? Let's say that on the first roll, somebody got a 3 and they landed on Baltic Avenue and they don't want it. It's brown and they don't like brown and it's a crappy little property. So someone lands on brown and they say they don't want to buy it.
You're probably going to buy it.
Well, okay. So what do the rules say that you should happen?
The rules say you have an auction.
The rules say that you have an auction. And this is something that you want to pay attention to, because one of the things we've talked about, you want to get as many properties as you can. So if someone lands on a property, especially a property that you like, let's say that it's one of our oranges or our reds over here.
That's gonna be a bloodbath.
Right? So let's say they land on Tennessee Avenue and they're tapped out for some reason. They can't put out the $180 necessary to buy that property. And so they say, I'm not going to buy it. You want to make sure that you're playing according to the rules and that there's an auction. Especially if you have resources and you think you can get it. Because you want that piece and you want to acquire as many properties as possible early in the game.
Yep.
So when people land on properties and they're not buying them, you want to try and buy them up so that you can get as many as you can. And even if they're sort of the ones over here that people don't like, or they're the ones over here that may be expensive and you know that they're not going to be valuable, you want to use them to wheel and deal. You want to include them in trades to try and get people to give you the properties that you want, depending on the strategy. Okay?
Yep.
So that's one rule. Another one, so people play with what are called house rules. And a lot of the times the house rules are made up to make the game more interesting, or they think that they make the game more fair.
Is the game too savage for you? Then you shouldn't be playing Monopoly.
Well, that's true. So one of the rules is that whenever there's a fine, so if you get the income tax fine, or you get a community chest or chance card that usually has you pay out money of some kind, normally that money is paid into the bank. And there's a reason why it's paid into the bank, because it's taking the money out of the game, right?
Yeah.
Some people will play it where instead of paying the bank, you put that money in a pot in the center, and whoever lands on free parking gets that pot. And so it's sort of like a lottery. All this money gets sort of put into the middle instead of being taken out of the game, and then if somebody lands on free parking, they get a big windfall.
Nice.
It can be a little bit more fun. It stretches out the game. So if you're playing the game with the intent of trying to eliminate players from the game, this creates a problem for you, because whenever that money is paid into the bank as a fine or whatever, then it's out of circulation, right? People are then dependent on pass and go for income, or having other players land on their properties to gain income. Whereas if you have this big pot here, the money just sort of sloshes around and it changes hands between the players, and it means that they're less vulnerable overall. Everyone playing the game is less vulnerable to elimination.
Someone's just gonna hit free parking and win the jackpot.
Yeah, well, it has a tendency to prolong the game. It makes the game longer, because when the money's not being paid to the bank in these fines or whatever payments come from the chance and the community chest, the combined finances of all the players means that it's less likely for people to be eliminated. It's not that it still can't happen. You may be the richest player and happen to land on free parking, and then you get even more money. But it's also a possibility that you have a weak player that's close to elimination that suddenly gets a big influx of cash, and now they can make a couple more trips around the board, and depending on the way things happen, they stay in the game longer. Maybe they're able to, unmortgage properties that they have mortgaged, and now all of a sudden they have income. And it just becomes the thing. If you play with that house rule, you're more likely to extend out the game.
Bro, Monopoly takes long enough already. Monopoly is not a game night game, it is a game week game.
No, this is true. It's just something to think about whenever you're playing with something. Like if you want to play to win against people, that's a rule that you might want to protest. No, I don't want to play with that. Another rule that sometimes people play to try and make it more fair is that people can only buy properties after they've made one trip around the board.
Ooh.
Now, the reason that some people have tried playing with this game with this rule is that Your early game success can be heavily dictated by early dice rolls, right? Because everyone starts out with a set amount of cash. You're pretty flush. You can buy a lot of properties very early in the game. And so that means that those early dice rolls mean that you can get really good properties. So let's say I roll like double six. So I get 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I get all the way around the horn to the electric company. I can buy that, right? And then let's say I get something else, like fours or something. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, now I get an orange property, right?
Yeah.
So I just rolled 2 doubles, and I get 2 properties. One in a not terribly great place, one in a good place, and then let's say I roll something else again. Let's like I get 3, right? So I don't end up in jail, and I get a 3. And I got a chance to buy. I get 2 orange properties, and the electric company, and it's based on those early dice rolls. And so the chances of me winning this game just shot up exponentially based on my first 3 dice rolls. Because I got 2 great properties. I'm 2/3 of the way to my first Monopoly, and I have a third property that is not great, but it gives me something that I can trade away or I can mortgage. It's an asset, right, that I can use. And so people will play with the rule where you have to go around the board at least once before you can buy up properties to try and mitigate that luck.
Typically, our luck balances out because knowing us, I would have landed on the 3rd orange property, and then that would have became a deal.
Yeah, that becomes a problem. And this is the reason why I've started calling it the dark arts of winning at Monopolies, because if you have someone else that you're playing against that knows the rules, then yeah, it becomes a problem really quick. You start butting heads over these properties and the railroads, and pretty soon, if it's like our family, you end up with just 2 people, and everyone else gets washed away in the destruction, and then you just have to call the game because you have these 2 people that know the strategies, and it's really hard to break the impasse.
Everyone just gets caught in the collateral damage.
Yes. So the third thing is about how you make trades and how to trick people. And this is, so you've played with Mom long enough.
Yeah.
What happens every time I propose a trade with your mother?
She trades. Well,
no.
Actually, she kind of holds off with you.
Yes, she will not do any trade that I propose.
Well,
because she knows that I'm trading for a position of advantage. So even if I offer her like the waterworks and the electric for one property,
it's gonna be that orange property.
Or yes, I'm trying to get the railroads, or I'm trying to get these oranges and reds. I don't think she's picked up. I haven't done the. If she watches this video, she'll know why. But yes, your mother never ever wants to trade.
She only ever trades with Aubrey, I think.
Yes, she trades with the small child. But you want to be an active trader because, especially when you have a larger number of players, it gets really hard just based on the luck of the rolls to assemble these monopolies. And especially if you have something over here, people think that these are good and they want them.
But they're not.
And so if you can say, hey, I'll trade you Park Place or Boardwalk or, North Carolina Avenue to get the 3rd red or the 3rd orange or one of these railroads, like that is a strong position. And like I said, I would give away both of the utilities to get one of these other pieces here.
That actually holds, that whole side that's green actually probably isn't very good, because if you land on go to jail, you're just all the way around the horn again. Or even after people pay, it's not exactly going to damage them because they're just going to get to go and get $200.
Right. So you want to trade if at all possible. The other thing, and it depends on how how people view the course of the game when people get in dire straits financially. So there is technically not a rule that if you, let's say I've got like 4 houses on Illinois Avenue and somebody lands on it, and then they're just going to be they're going to be stuck, but they have a railroad. And technically, there's no rule I've ever been able to find or rule interpretation that says that I can't say to that person, okay, well, I'll just give me the fourth railroad and we'll call your rent good.
Yeah, you've done that a couple times. Not often, but a couple times.
It's kind of a dirty trick.
It's the dirty trick for those orange and red properties.
Right. But property is more valuable than money in this game.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, you can mortgage properties and get cash. And they are income and they're a safe space if you have them. So, there is... there's value in it, but it's a little bit of a dirty trick because you're presenting someone the opportunity to give something much more valuable, even if they don't see it that way, than the cash, to wipe away their rent bill in one play and allow them to keep playing in the game. There, you could argue that the game is structured in a way where you shouldn't be able to do that, because what's supposed to happen is that when someone runs into a bill that they can't pay, is they gather up all their cash. If they have a get out of jail free card, they sell it for $50 to the bank and it goes back in the pile. They mortgage all of their properties for however much money that they can get, and then that goes to the player that owns the property that they're having to pay rent to. And then all of their property goes back to the bank. And so it's free. Yeah, it's free and it's sort of up for grabs again.
Yeah.
And that could be a very good situation. But if I'm in a strong position and I'm trying to win the game, I don't want properties to be up for grabs. I want them to go to me. And so this is another area where you're playing with the rules, and it's sort of... You want to play them in the best way possible.
The rules don't say you can't do that.
Right. I think some people would argue that it shouldn't be that way, and that they're going to force someone to go through mortgages of properties and liquidate them. But, you know...
kind of depends whether you're playing with someone who's really hardcore about the rule thing.
Yeah, well, you want to try and play the rules to your best advantage. One of those, in that it's difficult because printed on the card, it just has the mortgage value. So if we go back and we look at the mortgage value, so Monopoly card back. This is another thing that you want to pay attention to in the rules. So whenever you mortgage, you flip it over and you get $30 from the bank, and you're not allowed to collect rent if another player lands on it. And what happens a lot of time is whenever a person gets their $30 back, they feel more comfortable position. They give that back to the bank and they flip the card back over. According to the rules, you're supposed to pay double what the mortgage value is to get it back out of hock and make it playable again. And if you have someone that's in a position where they've mortgaged lots of properties and now they're back on their footing and they're going to try and take a bunch of stuff out.
You gotta be like, hold up. You gotta pay double.
Yes, that's the way that the rules are written in the official rules. And so that's a thing that you kind of have to watch. It puts you in a position where if somebody is trying to take uh, their properties out of mortgage. You know, if they have all their properties active, then those are places where they could be collecting rent. It may not be a good position for you, so that's an area where you might want to pay closer attention to the rule, is that they have to mortgage them. Another thing. So, is it good or bad to be in jail?
Actually, kind of depends on how you think about it. Mostly, you still collect revenue in jail, so actually it might not be that bad.
So here's how it breaks down if you pay attention. Early game, jail is bad. So, early jail bad. So early jail is bad because that's when all of these properties are free for you to acquire. And so in that case, you may want to go ahead, pay the $50, get your roll and get out so you can land on pieces and you have an opportunity to buy property.
And especially if you are in jail, if you roll out, you get all the good properties.
If they're available.
Well, if they're available, depending.
So late jail, not bad. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily good, but you're right. You get to collect revenue while you're in jail.
And you don't have to move and land on anyone else's property.
You don't have to move and land on anywhere else's property. And there is no penalty for using your maximum number of rolls to try and get out of jail. So you get to roll the dice 3 times to try and get a double to get out of jail. And there's no penalty for it. So it's not like, okay, you can roll doubles, or you can try and roll once, and if you don't get out of jail, it's $50. And then if you try it your next turn and it's the second time and you fail, it's $100.
Oh, that would be a real cutthroat way to play Monopoly.
Yeah.
Someone make that their house rule.
So, yeah, while you're in jail, so when we were talking about before, like if I got to 12 and I got that property and then I got one of these, well, let's say that I rolled like would it be 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I sort of trapped. But let's say I roll another double and I end up back in jail. I'm lined up on my first turn to plow through the properties that I really want again. So I would be excited about rolling 3 doubles, getting 2 properties, ending up in jail, and then on my next turn paying $50 and then going through and trying to buy up these properties again. It would actually be not that big a deal. So yeah, the way that you play jail early is a little bit different than the way that you play it late. And the way that you play jail can have an impact on how you play the game. So like I said, early in the game when there's properties available, you want to get as much as possible. So if you're stuck in jail, that's a problem. In the middle to late game, jail becomes less of a problem because you're not landing on anyone else's property. Anyone that lands on your property still has to pay, and there's not really a penalty for sitting in jail. And in fact, if your strategy has worked and you own this zone over here right out of jail, then yeah, going to jail and sitting there for 3 turns and then knowing on your third turn that you're going to be out with a high probability of landing in the properties that you own
and not paying.
That's actually a pretty sweet deal. So that is how you can use jail to your effect. The other thing is the get out of jail free card. So the get out of jail free card has a set monetary value. It's $50, right? Which is the fine you have to pay to get out of jail if you can't roll doubles.
Yep.
The get out of jail free card, even if it's late game and you don't necessarily or you're not necessarily concerned about sitting in jail, it might be the sweetener that allows somebody or convinces somebody to conduct a trade with you that sets you up in a good position. So let's say there's one railroad available, and let's say it's the BO, like it's a good railroad.
Yep.
And you really want that railroad, and you have somebody else, and you're offering the two utilities, or maybe like the last piece of this monopoly, and one of the utilities or something like that. There's a chance that they're not, because people like railroads. That is one downside of building a strategy of trying to win with railroads, is for the most part people like them. They like the choo-choos, right? And just because they're trains.
Trains are cool.
They just love them to death. They like owning trains, even if they don't comprehend the strategic value in the trains.
Just add that little get out of jail free card.
You add the little get out of jail free card, and it might sweeten the deal enough that if somebody goes ahead and makes the deal, it gets you your last train and becomes part of your winning strategy. And that's the kind of thing where if you have two people who are well versed in the dark arts, maybe one of you has the oranges and the other side has the reds, whoever can complete a train set and get all four, or maybe get three, especially if it's one of these two as part of it. Somebody who can get trains, that might be the deadlock that breaks it with you and someone else. Or perhaps if you're in a game where you have two people who are wheelers and dealers, and they're offering up some properties to someone, and really it's equal value, and you're trying to get somebody to go ahead and bite and take your trade instead of the other person's trade.
That get out of jail free card is the cherry on top. They need to take your deal.
Well, it can help. It sort of depends. And if you play with the same people a lot of times, you may get a situation where it's like your mom. She will never trade with me. Ever.
I don't think she's really looking to trade with me either.
Yeah, she's not really a wheeling dealer to begin with, but she knows that that's a big part of my strategy, is to make a lot of deals to gather up a lot of properties, and especially certain properties. And so she just assumes that every trade that I make is bad for her, and she won't trade.
But it is.
Most of the time. So that's one of the things you may want to think about too. This is a little more harder. This is a little more Sun Tzu. But if you have somebody that's much more willing trading partner, you need to see what properties they have available, and maybe you make a smaller deal with someone else to try and get properties that you're more applicable trader. So you're thinking two trades in a row. Like, I make this trade, and that gives me the material to make this second trade.
Nice.
So,
what is this drawing supposed to be?
It's just a doodle, because we're going all over the place. So you're trying to either trying to put together the material that your willing trader will part with, or maybe the willing trader has something that you think you can package together for your person, like mom, that doesn't want to trade. And so I will make a trade with the willing trade partner to try and put together a good package for that one. So I'm thinking a couple of trades down the road. And so that's pretty much the dark arts of winning Monopoly, is you weaponize the math and the probabilities so that you know which one of these squares is the most valuable. You try and acquire as many properties as you can early on, and then you try and use the rules to your advantage when you can. You want to auction for properties. You want to make sure that you're doing the auction for properties if someone's not buying something they landed on, especially if you have money and it's the property you want. You want to try and limit people's ability to develop houses, if at all possible, so that you can sort of stunt their development. And you want to try and make the best deals possible to sort of fill in and get those high quality properties. And if the opportunity presents itself so that you can get valuable long-term assets, i.e. a property, in exchange for cash, if you need cash, you should go ahead and take the cash. But if you don't need cash and somebody's in a predicament where they may be willing to offer up a property instead of cash, you should take it.
Most definitely. Not recommended to share this with your friends you plan on playing Monopoly with.
Yes, or you'll end up like us and you'll call the other one a traitor.
Ha.
Ha. So you have any other questions?
Nope.
Nope. All right. So there you go. I hope you enjoy that. What are we supposed to say at the end of every YouTube?
Like and subscribe.
Oh, yeah. And you're supposed to hit the bell. Yeah. Be part of the bell club.